Hello and welcome to this episode. This is a special episode. I am joined here by my husband, James Mattingly,
Friend of the podcast.
a friend of the
Hi, everyone.
podcast. James has been on many episodes, so you might already know him, but in case you don't, let me give you a quick intro. Or do you want to intro yourself?
No, I'd love to hear your
You
intro.
want to give me an intro? Well, let's see. James and I have been together for almost 6 years. Before I met him, he was leading transformational experiences for people through yoga teacher trainings. So he led yoga teacher trainings for 7 years and had gone deep into masculine feminine dynamics, and now he works with men around masculinity and how to fight for love, fight for love,
Fight for your fellow brother
fight for your fellow brother.
rather than against him. For him rather than against.
Oh, I love that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So he teaches about masculinity through the avenue of boxing. Yeah. And he's an overall amazing man, excellent facilitator, excellent lover.
Take it.
Anything you want to add?
No,
Yeah.
I can add something. Just that I have the great good grace to be married to you. I'd say that's probably my number one achievement is being lucky. We happened to be at the same place at the same time together, and I snaffled you up. That's my number one accomplishment. Everything else pales in comparison.
Oh my gosh. That's very sweet. I also think our marriage is my biggest accomplishment
Yeah.
because I still like you after 6 years. I don't know if I ever thought I would get to that point.
No, well, I sent you a message the other day because I was driving down the street and I just had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude of like, oh, I'm looking forward to getting old with you, being 60 and 70 and 80. There's nothing in it for me that's feels like dread or trap or lack of space. It's like, oh yeah, I look forward to that.
No, thank you. I feel like that too.
Hmm.
All right. Well, I know you probably didn't expect a Hallmark card to start off your episode, but here we are. No, but in all seriousness, we are going to talk about our baby's birth story.
Yes.
This is our second baby, little Latham. He's now 6 months old. And this is also our second home birth. And
Didn't we do one on our first baby too?
we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another episode on our first birth with Lila. So if you just go back into the podcast, you'll find it. But really, my intention with sharing this is we had a pretty countercultural experience of birth, I would say, with our home births and the fact that we got to do it pretty natural without a lot of intervention was amazing. And I would love to share about how we prepared and how we got ready for this, and then what it was like to birth in this countercultural way. Because I really believe that birth has the potential to initiate women into their deepest feminine power. I still, to this day, when I face something hard, I think, yeah, but I birthed 2 kids. Like, I can do this. And I feel like if more women have that imprint of birth, of this empowering, transformative experience, that will radically change women on Earth forever. So, no pressure, but that's my hope for this episode. No.
Easy.
And I also know I would never considered home birth until I saw someone on Instagram sharing their birth story of a home birth. Peta Jean, actually. I don't know if you know her. And I was like, wow, okay, this might be something interesting. And then you had some friends that had also birthed at home, and I talked to them about their stories. And so hearing other women's stories really opened my eyes. And so, yeah, that's the intention. Where should we begin?
You want to take it from the birth itself, yeah?
Yeah.
You don't want to go back to the conception?
No. I think we can keep that one between us.
No, well, I just begin by saying that, it's so interesting to hear about it being countercultural, which it totally is. By far, home birth is statistically radical, but it's not something I think of as radical. I think the difference perhaps between you and I is that you had thought about and imagined kids most of your life, I never really wasn't part of my dreaming So my first exposure to kids were my friends that were having home births here in Ubud, and a friend of mine was a midwife, so I almost assumed that it would be a home birth.
Mm.
And where we live, it's a really common thing. But it is a great reminder to to remember that it's countercultural, and in a strange way, really cultural, because most of human history is home births.
Right.
Like we live in a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of time, like
Mhm.
minuscule compared to the history of women giving birth, where basically, if you go back a few generations, every single one of your ancestors had some variation on a home birth.
Right.
And that actually hospital birth, sterilized birth in the way that they're done in the West, that's the strange thing.
Mm.
That's the radical thing.
Right.
Perhaps that's a good place to start. Um, and then we'd already done it once. So I guess my question to you would be, what felt different going into the second birth as opposed to going into the first?
Well, I think the second birth had a feeling of, I was excited, but it also had a gravitas to it because I went into the first birth with this beautiful naivete of like, I'm young and strong. How hard can this be?
Mm,
And I remember in the first birth getting to a point after maybe being in labor for 5 hours or so and being like, okay, so I'm almost done, right?
yeah.
And my midwife is like, you are 4 centimeters dilated. Like, you have to buckle up here, girl. And I think, I don't mean that to scare anyone, but it was a lot. It was harder than I expected. And I'm also grateful for that because it showed me my power and capacity in a way that an easier birth wouldn't have. I don't know if there is such thing as an easier birth.
Well, this is I think it's a really valuable point, is what I notice here in the more conscious community around birthing
Mm-hmm.
for women that have had their first birth, is they
Yeah.
have what you had, but even more extreme. So there's a
Mm.
lot of like love and light, and I'm going to have an orgasmic birth, and it's
Just
going to
gonna
be this
exhale out the
playlist.
baby.
Exactly. Exactly. And they quickly realize that's just not the reality for 99.9%.
Mm-mm.
But the downside of that, or the damaging side of that, is I find a lot of the people that are really in the love and light side of home birthing end up having to get some kind of intervention
Mm-hmm.
because they're not mentally or physically prepared for the fact that actually this is really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Like it'll be the hardest thing you ever do. And it can also be spiritual and beautiful and deep, but perhaps not in the way that you're expecting.
Yeah. Totally. I think it's such a good point because um, it's so hard for me to see people go into home birth with all this hope and expectation, but it not work because they weren't prepared to meet themselves in that deep way. And like,
Yeah.
I know for me, birth was not beautiful and glamorous. It is like blood and grit and sinew and like it is like of earth and moon. It's not light and love. It's intense and hard. But it also radically changed the way I look at myself. Um, so I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm so grateful for it, but it is, yeah.
Perhaps there's no analogy that I think,
Yeah.
especially as a dude, there's no analogy that I think could ever come close to it. But what comes to my mind is like you're preparing for a 5K run,
Mm-hmm.
and like your water bottle, and you're like, this is going to be hard. It's hard to run 5K, but I've got my water bottle and I'm ready to go, and
Got
I've
my
got my
sneakers.
favorite songs ready to go. And you get there and you get like 4.5K in, and you realize there's 3 ultra marathons back to back. The 300-kilometer run, and you're like, oh, I didn't sign up for this. Somebody get me a taxi. Right.
Right.
Which also happens in regular hospitals. The same thing is when they're preparing to do a natural birth, but then ask for some kind of give me the drugs is the classic line from a movie.
Yeah.
But what I noticed is from first to second is the second to me had more of the orgasmic power grace aspect to it.
Mm.
But I think that's because you realize the scope of it. And I want to hear your words on this, but it's almost like when you look for the grace and the love and the light and exhaling out the baby, it actually misses where it comes from.
Mm.
The grace comes from those moments of deep down pulling and doing something you never thought you could and bringing life into this world. But there's nothing about it that's easy, but that doesn't make it any less grace filled. Is
I
that
love that. I'm reading this book actually on motherhood, and she has the mantra I love. She said, hard is not bad.
mm,
Hard is not bad. And yeah, I feel like in the first birth, I really like it dropped me down as a woman where I'm like, wow, I'm far more powerful than I thought I was.
mm,
And I can do things that are harder than I thought I could do.
mm,
And so going into the second birth, I knew I was going to run 3 ultra marathons, so I prepared for it mentally and physically. And so that my hope was I could rise up to meet the challenge and to knowing that what it's going to be. And I knew I could do it. But I feel like I took it more seriously,
huh,
the second birth,
mm,
with reverence, not with fear.
mm. And the other thing that I noticed within that is, in particular, the sounds that you were making were very, very different.
Mm.
In the first one, they were, I don't know if this will make sense to you. The sounds were happening to you,
Mm.
and the second ones you were happening to, you were happening to the sounds, or the sounds were coming through you.
Mm.
First one they're happening to you, and the second ones are coming through you.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does make sense. And it reminds me of this quote that I got from NMA. I may butcher it, but she's like, you have to rise up to meet the waves, and like imagine being on top of the waves and surfing with them, but rising up to meet them. And I had that image in my second birth going into it of like, I'm gonna meet the sensation and let it all the way in and move me.
Totally felt that.
Yeah. Should we tell them the story?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, the birth started the same way the pregnancy started. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, if you're listening to this, just skip forward 30 seconds. All right.
Oh yeah.
So if you're not our parents, the birth actually started while we were making love. We were making love, and it was this really like connected, orgasmic moment. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I squirting? I'm like, but wait,
Which is pretty likely in pregnancy.
Yeah, there's a lot of squirting in
Pregnancy.
pregnancy.
Yeah. So that wasn't unusual.
No, but the volume was, and then I stood up and then my waters gushed like a movie. Like it was amazing. There was just water everywhere. Remember how you felt in that moment?
Well, yeah. Gushed is the right word. So much about movies and birth is incorrect, but the amount of water was actually correct. But how I felt in that moment is like, oh my God, this is urgent. Because every time I've seen that in movies, it's usually on a New York street corner, the water breaks, like, get this woman to a hospital. And so I felt a little like panicky. And then we rang our amazing midwife, and she said, yeah, well, it could be coming in a few hours, but it could be a few days.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I remember feeling like looking at you and thinking how endearing it is to see you a little bit panicky. Because if you know my husband, he is like stable, solid, unflappable 99.9% of the time.
It's true.
And so to see you a little like, what do we do? It's still one of my favorite moments.
I haven't said that before. It's funny.
Yeah, but I remember feeling like so excited, like, it's starting, it's happening. Oh, and before that, actually, I had gone to the bathroom and wiped and been like, oh, I think that might have been my mucus plug.
Oh yeah.
And because there was like, I was looking up images on Google Image of like, is this a mucus plug? And yeah, so my water broke. And that was a relief because my belly was huge.
Yeah, and it was noticeably smaller after that.
Yeah, it was like I went back 2 months in pregnancy. And that just felt like such a relief because I went from feeling like a whale to feeling like a seal. And then, but nothing like I was having really light contractions, but nothing big. So we went on a walk around the neighborhood and we had some dinner. I was a bit nauseous, so I didn't eat much. But yeah, and our oldest was there, and my mom was there. And I remember really clearly wanting to not, like in my first birth, I was so focused from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I was like doing all the mantras from the beginning that I burned myself out after a few hours.
Yeah, a sprint, not a marathon.
Yeah. So this time I'm like, I'm just going to ignore it until I can't ignore it anymore.
So you made granola?
Yeah. And then I think things really shifted once I got our oldest downstairs for a sleepover with my mom.
Yeah.
I like settled her in and like got her, her stuffed animals and stuff. And then I said, okay, good night, honey. And at that point I was feeling like pretty spacey, like, and the contractions were getting stronger. So it was a relief to be like, okay, so my oldest is in good hands. I never really imagined her at the birth for some reason. Like I know often people are like, oh, like she should see a birth, but I never pictured her there.
It's also a nighttime thing in our case,
Yeah.
You started making granola,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of hilarious because that's when things really started ramping up. Lila's down for bed with grandma, and then you're making granola and the contraction is becoming stronger and harder. And you're like, well, I think we better go upstairs.
Yeah, totally. We left the granola like in the oven and went upstairs. On a timer, by the way, it didn't burn. And yes, then we went upstairs. And at this point, it's 8:30. And I'm like, I think we better call the midwife and just have her spend the night here because I don't know how quick it's going to go.
Yeah. And she gave us the advice just to like lay down, kind of sleep. So it's really good advice. So you're not doing the sprint, right? So you lay down, you kind of get in that dreamy space, and contraction comes and you have the contraction, you let it go and you lay down. That wasn't really happening.
Oh no, it was ramping up so fast. It's funny. I can feel it in my body now as we're talking about it. Like I almost feel like the same like nausea, butterflies. But yeah, it was ramping up way too quickly to just like sleep through the contractions. I was like, honey, we need to stand up and move around.
Yeah.
And then I remember, like, I also wanted to bring more sex and sensuality into the birth this time. So we tried making out and like, playing with sensuality. But that was way too much sensation.
Yeah, there was a lot going on.
There's already way too much happening in my own body and then like trying to meld with your body.
It was already at the point that when you're having the contractions, they were taking 95% of your attention and awareness.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite 150% yet. That would come later.
Right.
But around 95. So if it was perhaps Lila and we had those moments, we could have, because there was less intense for longer. But this one just went shoop, ramped up quick.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. But I just remember being forehead to forehead, standing and swaying with you through every contraction. Like you might like go and I don't know, you were like getting some stuff set up, but then I would yell wave and you'd come over and we'd be forehead to forehead, breathing and sounding through each wave.
There was only one that I wasn't. Do you remember?
With Leanne.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were you doing?
I think I was preparing the tub, or there was something I had to do. I think it was the tub. And then you had one, but it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Because our midwife is just a total boss, and you were very well held and held each other very well.
Totally. But I do remember how interesting it was to ride that wave with her versus you.
What was it?
Because she was so soft in her energy. And I almost felt like I was a tsunami that was going to overtake her. Whereas when I was doing the waves with you, I felt like you were the shore I was breaking against.
God.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. That might sound woo-woo to you, those of you that are not in labor land. Labor land being the trippy altered state you get into when you're deep in labor. Yeah, so we were just moving through wave after wave, and let's see. It was maybe 9:30, 10:30. The midwife came and the doula came and they started setting up like the birth tub and dim the lights and put on candles and music. And so it was a really beautiful ambiance. Oh, I do remember our doula. This was her first actual home birth that she had seen. So she came into the room in the middle of a wave. By the way, I call contractions waves because it feels better to me, because contraction makes me feel like I have to tight and tense, and wave feels like something to ride. So she came in the middle of a wave. Do you remember? And I just hissed, "Don't!"
Yeah, happened a couple of times.
Yeah. And I felt a little bad, but I had nothing in me besides that don't. And then when the wave subsided, I was like, hey, doula, do you mind just like not coming in and out of the room during a wave? Like, I just really need the whole room to be still and concentrated during the wave.
Such a great juxtaposition. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Excuse me, next time, can you just not come in when you hear me?
It's so true. It is such a trip. I think I expected birth to be like this continuous state, but it's really like in the waves, I was one primal creature of the earth.
Yeah.
And between waves, I could be like my normal self.
And perhaps that refers a little bit to what we're talking about in the beginning with the intentions of love and light birth. It's like when you're deep in a wave, there's no putting anything in or taking anything out.
Yeah.
There's not like adding in a mantra or thinking about this or thinking about, because there's no thinking, right?
No.
Like when you're in that, you are just so fully in that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can really do is ride it or fight against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so true. Yeah. And there's like, it really feels like a stripping away of all social pretenses when I'm in the wave. Like, I don't know what sounds are coming out or what my face looks like or my hair or.
Fuck good girl.
Oh, yeah. That was another key moment. Oh my God. As I felt this wave approaching, I just, and this was maybe halfway through active labor, a little bit before transition, I'd say. I just looked at James and I was like, fuck good girl. And then rode the wave. And then after I think I explained it to you, but I was like, I felt like there was a good girl part of me that wanted to do birth right.
Yeah.
I was like, if I just make the right exhale and if I soften my jaw and if I like, you know, swirl my hips and all the things I've read in all the birth books, I'll do it right and I'll, you know, I don't know, get applause or something. But then this other primal, like Amazonian warrioress part of me came out and was like, it felt like a blood and sinew and like lineages of women before me that was like, there is no roadmap for this. And my body knows moment to moment and like, fuck good girl. Like that part will not get you through this birth. That was an amazing moment, actually.
I remember it well.
Yeah. And it gave me like this body imprint of what it feels like to feel that Amazonian part of me that I come back to again and again. And I actually needed later in the birth around the placenta too.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. We have the fuck good girl moment. We have the riding the waves.
You did a great job, and this was a clear intention. So the moments that I think you can bring intentions or ideas in between the waves, right? And you brought in humor, which is one of your intentions. You watched that hilarious video of that woman, right? It was really funny in her.
She was joking between contractions.
Yeah. And you know, joking loosens up, right? It's the opposite of contraction. So you're making some really funny jokes in between, particularly in the beginning.
Could I tell them what the jokes are about?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
James said my mom had been feeding him raw kale, so he was pretty gassy.
So gassy.
So I was making fart jokes throughout the whole birth.
Yeah.
Between the waves. Or making making hilarious jokes. And then as the baby was descending in my pelvis, I made like a fisting sign at James. It was what it felt like. Yeah. So yeah, humor was a big thing.
Great. Yeah.
And then what about the moment in the bathroom? Remember the team was just finishing up the birth pool, but I really wanted privacy, so I pulled James into the bathroom.
Well, I think all of the waves felt different from the first birth, partly from what I mentioned, but partly just because I was more calm and centered. Like I had actually had 100% trust in you on the first birth too. I knew it was going to work out fine. But there's thinking and living through it, and this time I lived through it. So something in me was more calm, and what the calmness and space in me allowed was more of the present moment to be there. And that combined with you really tapping into those energies. I just remember being in the bathroom, standing, swaying through one of these waves, and like we had shutters and moonlight was coming through the shutters onto your face, and you were the wave noise. It's not a scream like you hear in the movies. It's a deep guttural primordial sound that comes up and through. And I just remember looking at you, and you were simultaneously more you than I've ever seen you, and every woman that has ever been. You know? And I just remember looking at you like you're this, like you were looking at me, but totally threw me into a different world at the same time. And it was beautiful. It was really strikingly, hauntingly gorgeous. And yeah, I mean, that would be etched in me forever.
I feel really touched hearing that. And yeah, I feel like there's something so powerful about partners seeing their woman give birth.
Mm.
You know, that's like we women are so much more powerful than we know. And I think it leaves an imprint of how powerful women are.
There's that particular poem that I read at every men's baby blessing. Remember our men being involved in birth? So valuable.
Do you remember any of the lines from it?
Oh, none that would make sense out of context. Like there's little snippets of like enlarging to impossible spaces, or you who thought birth bringing was others' work. You know, it's a beautiful poem.
Those are the same lines that stuck in my head, actually.
yeah?
Yeah, funny. It is a really beautiful poem. Maybe we'll link it in the show notes. Yeah, so let's see, back to the story. It was maybe 10 o'clock by now, 10 p.m. So my water broke at 4 p.m. Things really started picking up around 8:30. One of the best descriptions of labor I've heard is like stepping stones. Like you like get into a groove with a certain thing, like a certain sound or a position to stand in or a way to sway your body. And then you get to do an upstep of intensity. And then you have to like find the next groove to get into, and then an upstep. This one felt like very narrow steps.
Yeah, it was escalated rapidly.
It did. It went so fast. Yeah, so at around 10 o'clock, I got into the birth tub and I was on my hands and knees. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to birth this time on my hands and my knees, because last time I rolled over on my back with my legs up in the birth tub. So it wasn't quite the classical position, but it was basically.
Ironically, it's a medical classical position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And I don't know if it was because my mind had that imprint from all those movies or something, but that's the way I birthed my first baby, was on my back with my knees up. So this time I'm like, I actually know it's like easier physiologically to birth on hands and knees or squatting. So I'm going to try that. So I get on my hands and my knees and we're moving through it. And then again, I'm like, nope, got to turn over, get back into that classic position. Yeah, I do remember a moment when I started to feel like I needed to push, but I wasn't sure. And so I asked our midwife to check. I think that was the only time she actually checked my cervix.
It was only once, yeah.
Only once. And she checked and she said, you're almost fully dilated. Just see if you can soften a little bit more. And I took a deep breath and I softened everything in my body. Everything. And then she said, wow, okay, you're dilated.
Yeah, do you think that was, remember in the birth steps and stages, there's that one that's like I don't remember what it's called, but it's the drop before the pushing.
Yeah,
No,
transition.
Transition, yeah. Was that the transition?
It could have been, yeah, because I suddenly felt like I had it the whole birth. Like I wasn't leaning on the midwife or anything really. It was just James and I. But then in that moment, I felt flummoxed. I felt like I didn't know what to do. And that's a really characteristic of being in transition, of like a sudden panicky, I don't know what to do. Yeah, so she checked and then she's like, okay, you're pretty much fully dilated. You can start pushing if your body feels ready. So yeah, then I started pushing and it was quick.
Yeah.
With Lila, like pushing was maybe 45 minutes. With Latham, it was like maybe 4 waves. And he went from crowning to head out to body out, whole body, everything out in 1 wave.
Went from inside to outside in 1 wave.
1 wave, whole body, everything. It was like this wave that went on and on and on. And I was just pushing and I thought, oh, I need to slow this down, because I remember if you slow down the pushing while he's crowning, you reduce your likelihood of tearing. So I need to slow it down, but it was like a wave that could not be slowed.
Surprised the hell out of me.
Yeah, but I caught him myself.
Yeah.
Which is so, because
neither of us knew, because last time I caught Lila, so we kind of assumed that would happen again.
Yeah.
I don't think either me or our midwife was expecting the baby all the way out in 1 push.
No, you both were like, whoa. Yeah, so I don't even really remember catching him. It was just like this 1 wave that went on and on and on, and then caught him.
And it turns out there was a really good reason for it, right? We joke he was a little shibari baby. The cord was triple wrapped.
Mm-hmm.
And Leanne said that, or our midwife said that because of the amount of wrapping, if it was a long drawn out push, it could have decreased the oxygen flow through the umbilical cord to the baby. So something in your body and his body knew that it just needed to, it was
Just
go
go
time.
fast.
Just go.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think, I'm like, wow, it's such amazing, that wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he was wrapped up around his chest and his arms and like quite wrapped up. Lila was wrapped up too, but just once. And this little baby was wrapped up like 2 or 3 times. And yeah, she said if it had gone slower, it might have put the baby in distress. But the fact that my body and his body knew that and just pushed them all out in one wave, I'm like, wow, our bodies are so wise.
Yeah.
And she was listening to his heartbeat through this moment, so she knew that he was okay.
Totally.
Yeah, so then we just unwrapped him. I remember in my first birth, like, it's not a big deal if the baby's wrapped up because they're still getting oxygen through the umbilical cord. So we just unwrapped him, brought him up, and held him on my chest. And he looked up at us. Remember, he looked at you, he looked at me, and he was just so calm.
Super chill.
But then he didn't breathe right away.
Yeah, he didn't take any audible breaths or make any audible sounds.
No.
And Lila was quiet for a little while too, but she was still clearly breathing, and then she cried a little while later.
Yeah.
But he was just so quiet. And Leanne's midwife started checking things. So she started checking the heartbeat, and then that was the first thing. And then there was another thing checked behind, and then he still wasn't breathing. So then she took him out of the water and rubbed his feet. And there was like 3 or 4 things that were escalating. And at that point, I just freaked out. I just stopped breathing.
Yeah.
I stopped breathing myself. Yeah, it was very scary.
I remember thinking, like, it was my big fear for some reason in pregnancy that like he would be born not breathing. And so I knew all the steps. So with any fear that I have, like I do a ton of research to get information on like what would we do if that happened? Like that's a way that I calm my reptilian brain. So I knew like, okay, the first step would be like check heartbeat and lungs, and then you'd rub their feet and their back, and then if not that, then you can give them some oxygen. And so there's steps we would take.
Yeah.
But I do remember in that moment feeling so calm.
You were very calm.
But also like really, if you're pregnant, you might want to skip this part because it's a little intense. But if you're not, can be helpful. Really calm because I'm like right at the threshold between life and death. You know, it's like I brought this baby into the world, and it really felt like this is not up to me whether he decides to stay in this world or not. And we were talking to him the whole time, like, we love you, baby boy. Yeah. You know, we're so ready for you to be part of our family. Come join us. And then our midwife listened to his lungs, and she's like, oh no, he is actually breathing. He's okay.
He's just a quiet breather.
He's just really quiet.
Yeah, he was probably breathing the whole time, but smaller, shallower breaths in the beginning. Yeah. And he didn't even, he didn't. Well, I just want to say one thing, because that really stuck with me. It actually happened to me at my birth with my father as well, where he thought that I had died, and he stepped into my mum and me because I was in a very normal way, like black and blue and not breathing. So that really got its hooks. It's got some scar into me, and we had someone take us through a process around it, like a week or 2 later, and it was so valuable to revisit it, like because now I think back to it and I don't have that contraction around it. Me either. But before I definitely did. Freaked the hell out of me. Yeah, I just want to touch on that. Like, it's really interesting to see kind of the karmic cycle loop of like when you were born black and blue and not breathing right away too. And your parents freaked out or your dad freaked out. Your mom didn't know. And then to have your son be born in a similar way, also, you know, blue and not quite breathing yet. But then both you and your son being totally okay. Yeah. It's really interesting how that looped. Yeah, and with the process we did a few weeks later is just going back and like imagining, telling ourselves in that moment, like, your baby's okay. Like, he's going to be okay. No, it was more than that. It was taking us back in the process and then visualizing us in the moment, and then also visualizing us next to us, telling us what we needed to know. Yeah. So it was like me next to me telling me what I needed to hear in that moment. Yeah. It's crazy. It totally worked. It really did. Really surprising. Yeah, it was really helpful. So, and I think
My guess now looking at this is I think he was just a bit in shock that he was like, whoa, I
Totally.
came out so fast.
Yeah.
You know, I was not expecting that. Um, yeah, so then he was breathing, but he was just laying so calmly in our
Mm.
arms and kind of like snuffling around a little, and he latched on pretty quick.
He didn't cry for maybe 45 minutes, an hour.
At least I think
Because
it was more like
because
almost
it
two.
was after the placenta.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the placenta in a moment, but there was the birth, the latching out of the pool,
Hmm.
placenta birth, and then you went to go to the bathroom or the shower,
Hmm.
and then you gave him to me,
Yeah.
and then he didn't cry with me, and then when I gave him back to you was when he cried for me.
Yeah, I know you love
Daddy's
that.
boy.
Yeah. Yeah, so he didn't cry for like 2 hours. And I
Yeah.
think it's because his birth was so um peaceful. Like, you know, all the lights were dark and he was born in warm water and he was held with gently and like always with me. And then until he was with you. But it was such a nice entrance into the world.
It was done with resonance.
Yeah.
Like you were in resonance with him the whole way through.
Yeah.
I think probably you could have done that and you could have been born into a really bright room with the marching band. And he
Mhm.
still would have been chill. But
Mhm.
it was because you guys were in resonance and the other stuff just helps.
Yeah. True. Um, yeah, and then if you listen to the first birth story, you know that the placenta being birthed was like a whole thing in the first birth. It took 4 hours. And so after the baby was born, I started to get anxious about, like, okay, is my placenta going to take forever? And, you know, I got a little fluttery and we tried to birth the placenta in the pool, but it didn't quite work. And then our midwife had me get out and sit on a birthing tub and push. And she's like, okay, give it your all. And I'm like, okay, you know, I'm trying to push, but not really. Like it was half-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
I think because after I'm like, my baby's here. I'm done. You know, I crossed the finish line.
Birth after the birth.
Right. I never expected birthing a placenta to be like a whole second birth.
Yeah.
And I know for some women it's not. For some women it literally just slithers out, which is what I expected. Just slithers out. For me, it was not like that. And then she said, no, really, like go back to that Amazonian woman and give it everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, something clicked. I'm like, okay. And so I like roared and pushed and like, and then the whole placenta came out and it was a big, healthy,
big placenta,
big, healthy placenta. So that was a relief. And we left it attached to him for the night, little mini lotus birth, just to help him continue to have kind of the peaceful entrance into the world. Yeah. And then you held him. And our midwife was like, do you want to go take a shower now? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm covered in like blood and I was gonna say guts, nobody's guts. It's just
blood.
Just blood and sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I showered and you were just holding him and he was so peaceful.
So chill.
So chill.
Chill ass Latham.
Yeah. Maybe we just talk about the next morning when Lila met him and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
So the next morning we tried to sleep that night. I did not sleep. I was on such an adrenaline high. Could not sleep. And I also wanted to like constantly keep checking, like, is he still okay? Is he still breathing? He was so tiny. Oh. Yeah, and then the next morning, Lila came up and met her little brother.
And your mom?
And my mom, and that was such a sweet and special moment.
Yeah, it was really sweet. It was lovely to see them together for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Lila was so sweet with them.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of work. Maybe there'll be a different episode, but a lot of work in preparing Lila too.
Mm-hmm. How do you touch a baby and what's it going to be like? And yeah. Yeah. So, okay, maybe to wrap it up.
Well, I've got a question for you to wrap it up. Perhaps.
Yeah.
So there's this paradox in birth when I'm noticing when we're talking about it. Like on one hand is you say you can't really prepare for it because nothing can prepare you for it until you're in it. So there's a trap of falling into the light and love and the mantra and orgasmic birth, but there's also things that you can do to prepare. And like, so what is the advice? Like what can they actually really work with and work on?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because in getting ready for my birth, I read so many books and listened to so many podcasts and took a hypnobirthing course and read like, 24 books and learned about this and learned about that. But I think the thing that actually helped me the most were two things. One was hearing other women's birth stories like this, like really learning about what it's like for women in birth.
Yeah.
I remember being in labor and like almost I could feel all the women's stories I had listened to before, like in the room with me, cheering me on.
And listening, goes without saying, to the type of births that you want to have.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
if you want to do a home birth, listen to home birth.
Exactly.
If you want to do a really amazing hospital birth, listen to someone that has a really amazing hospital birth.
Yes.
Not that it has to be perfect, but
for sure. And also with that, be really careful about listening to empowering births in the direction you want to go, because when you're pregnant, any birth story is going to leave an imprint on your mind, your subconscious.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons my placenta took so long after my first birth is I had just read 2 birth stories right before labor about delayed placenta.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, be really mindful about which stories you consume. That would be the first one. Oh, and In a Maze, Spiritual Midwifery. You can get it on Audible. And like the first 5 hours of the book is literally just empowering birth stories. I would just listen to that, brushing my teeth, in the car, going places.
She's a legend.
She is. And then the other thing that really helped me is practicing being with sensation and being with discomfort. So there's a number of ways we practice this.
Ice bath, baby.
We did a daily ice bath, and practice calming my nervous system when I think I'm gonna die. No. I'm really like breathing through and sounding through discomfort. There's also the exercise of holding ice in your hand for a minute from the book Birthing from Within, which is great. Holding squats. I did that with one of my doulas for a bit. See how long you can hold it and like embrace the shakes. But really like being with sensation. And you can also do it in sex, like bringing all of your focus into the sensation in your body. Like I actually think making love is one of the best birth preps you can do.
Me too.
Because it teaches you to like be with your sensations and your body moment to moment.
Yeah.
And open. Pain and pleasure are very similar, right? They're just intense sensations. It's your mind that decides which one it is. So being anywhere you can be with intense pain or intense pleasure is great birth prep.
Great, beautiful advice.
Thanks.
I'd say one thing that I really liked about the ice bath in particular is it harkens back to what we're talking about, difference between contraction and wave. So when you first get into an ice bath, most people will contract. Like I still contract for a second. You're like, oh, your body thinks you're going to die. And then if you can soften into it and ride that, then you're teaching your central nervous system something. You're teaching your body something about softening in the face of intensity. So I just want to add, for those of you that are looking at ways to practice in discomfort, the more ways you can practice in discomfort, but able to soften into it, that's what you want. Not just grinning and bearing through it.
Right. Yes. Love that. It's a really important nuance. And that's something you helped me with actually in the ice bath. We practiced you being with me in the ice bath.
Yeah.
And like making sounds with me and like, holding tight shoulders and helping me remember to relax. That was so helpful because then my body had the memory of like, you support me through this process. You're with me. I'd be curious from your end, what would you suggest to partners of women who are going to birth? How can the partners get ready for birth? Or what can they do that's really helpful?
It's hard to say anything that doesn't sound really esoteric, because really what helps is what I would say is space holding. So your capacity to soften the front surface of your body while keeping the strength of your spine and being present to what's happening is what's key. So she's going through one of the most empowering feminine experiences that exists, if not the most, right? So what it needs in the pole is not someone to be in the waves of the experience. It actually needs someone to be the shore that she's breaking upon, as you said before. So it's kind of similar actually with the ice bath, I'd say. What kinds of things can you do to put your body in moments of stress and pressure, and then practice breathing there and being present and open anyway.
Cool. And how would they practice that with their partner?
If I come to one of my retreats.
That is what you teach on your retreat.
I guess that's not with their partner. Partner, I think, just as what you said. So you do something with ice, or what else could it be? It could be squats, or it could be anything really that's difficult.
Fingering.
Well, it's a different type of preparation. But then breathing with them. And for guys that have done any men's work, this doesn't mean being stoic, doesn't mean being standoffish, which often comes out of David Data's lineage. It means holding the container, but then you can add into it. You can add your voice, you know, which I did a lot with you. I did a lot of toning with you. You can add your energy, rise up to meet the intensity just without being consumed by it.
Love that. Last question. How does a partner work with their fear around birth? Because like one of the things that really struck me in both births is how deeply you trusted my body. And I remember looking into your eyes and seeing you trusting me, and that giving me strength. So how does a partner cultivate trust in their partner's body like that?
I think there's two answers to it. The first one is having ducks in a row. Like for me, it was really important to have everything that we needed ready. I could rest in that for all scenarios, whether it went really well or we have backup plans. And the same goes for the team. So being able to trust the team, the midwife or the doctor, that puts my front brain, you know, my cognitive brain at rest. The small trust, I can trust in that. The bigger trust in is just faith, you know, it really is. It's like finding that part of you that can recognize the power of your partner, and that the only reason that you and her are there is that their mothers has been through this, and the mothers before them has been through this, onwards into infinity. And literally tens of thousands of women have done this, and is written into her being, her code, into her bones that she can do that. So in the moments that she forgets that, which she will through the intensity, that's what you tap into, and you reflect that back to her.
That is so beautiful, honey. I really love that. That was really supportive of me too, of like mantras like I was born for this. I was born to do this.
By this and for this.
Yeah, I was born by this and for this, and feeling the billions of women before me that have birthed like this. Wow, what an episode. There's so much in birth. Wow, it's a whole portal. But if you're listening to this, I would love for you to send me a little note on Instagram what you got from this episode, what takeaways. If it touched you, let me know. Of course, leave a review if you enjoyed it. But my hope with this episode is that it helped you believe in yourself. You know, however you birth, that it helped you tap into the part of you that knows you were born to do this. You are so capable of doing this. It's going to be hard, but you are stronger.
Beautiful message. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, guys.